of the leading practitioners of the art and science of Wall Street, Anthony Scaramucci, the founder of Skybridge Capital, and much, much more. He is an interesting guy, and before I bring him out, I thought I would share a little story, because Anthony is not only a person of Wall Street with an esteemed career there. He's a television host of Wall Street Week, and he is also a person who's been playing in the political arena over the last year as one of the central advisors to the Trump campaign, then the Trump transition, and we will see where that narrative ends. I thought with all of the discussion of the media, I'd tell you a story that's a little bit of a back-channel story. It didn't get a lot of coverage, but about 2 months ago, during the transition, the president was at Mar-a-Lago, and he had a special guest. This was, again, not widely reported at all. The Pope came to Mar-a-Lago, and they went out on a boat, on the president-elect's boat, and there was only one press person invited, happened to be from NBC News. Out they go, the wind kicks up, and the wind and President Trump's hair do not get along. But worse, the wind and the sacred skull cap that the Pope wears, I believe it's called the scappetto, was blown off Pope Francis's head and into the Atlantic Ocean, and the security staffs were really a Twitter, so to speak. And the papal security team says, well, we'll get in the dinghy and we'll go out and get the scappetto, and as the Secret Service says, no, we'll go get it, and Mr. Trump, being the gracious host that he is, said, no, I'll go get it. And so he steps down the ladder off the back of his yacht. By now, the skull cap is off 50 yards, and Mr. Trump walks across the water to pick up the skull cap, and the Pope is astounded, as are everyone else. He walks back across the water and hands the skull cap back to the Pope. And everybody knew what they had seen, a miracle. NBC returned and put the headline on the story, as only NBC News could: Trump can't swim. So there, in a nutshell, is where we are. We're going to talk a little bit about Wall Street, a little bit about politics, a little bit about the media. Please welcome Anthony Scaramucci. Welcome. Had you heard that? Had you heard that one before?
I've heard a couple versions of that one. Yeah, that's pretty good. We call NBC the National Barack Communications Company. But
National Barack Communications Company. We'll talk a little bit about media. You sort of broke on into the world of politics about 7-8 years ago at what happened to be a town hall that we had with CNBC had with Barack Obama, and you asked him a question: why or when are you going to stop treating business like a piñata?
Yeah, I wish I said it like that. I said it in a worse way than that. I basically said to the president on live television, when are you going to stop whacking Wall Street with a piñata stick? As an Italian American, you shouldn't use the word whack on live TV with the president. He didn't take to it pretty well. You know. But he got, I've known the president for, let's see, now it's probably 28 years. We went to law school together, had a good rapport. People probably don't know this about my background. Never got involved in politics until the 2008 campaign. And I met with then Senator Obama at the University Club, and he was like, listen, a lot of our classmates are backing me. I would like your support. And I supported him. And as like a good Roman Catholic, I've been paying penance ever since.
You've been going to confession.
Yeah, exactly. But I did support him because I liked him as a person. I still like him as a person. I just, once it became clear directionally where he was going with policy, I said, okay, I got to return to, I'm sort of a socially inclusive, fiscally responsible person. I don't like using the word socially liberal because we've spent billions of dollars to get half the country to hate that word. I don't like saying I'm fiscally conservative because we spent billions of dollars to get the other half of the country to hate the word conservative. And so I try to tell people that the words really do matter in politics. So I'm a social inclusive and fiscally responsible. But I didn't like directionally where he was going. That's why I amped up for Governor Romney and eventually President Trump.
It's interesting. I was going to ask this question later, and I want to come back to your history on Wall Street. But since you brought it up, I was thinking yesterday in getting prepared for this conversation that as I think about President Obama, I think people liked him personally. Many people did.
Yeah, no
liked him as a person. They had much to admire there. But they didn't agree with many of his policies. I think Mr. Trump is a harder to, which is not to say there are not a lot of people that like Mr. Trump. A lot of people do. But I think Mr. Trump is a harder to like guy, but people don't disagree with the directions of his policies in many cases.
I can see why you're saying that, Tyler, but I think when you meet him, you find that he's a very charming,
Yes.
very disarming human being. I think that some elements of his public persona are off-putting to a certain group of people. But I'll tell you, if you're a steel salesman in Michigan, or you're a coal miner in West Virginia, or someplace in Kentucky, you're actually not off-put at all. You're showing up, you're going to wait 8 hours in a line to see one of his rallies, or you're going to stand in line at a voting booth to vote for him. So he's definitely tapped into something that many of us in the media didn't see. And, you know, listen, I'll admit this, it's a large group, but I will admit this. I grew up in a middle-class family. My parents never went to college. I would never dishonor my folks by telling anybody I grew up poor. I did not grow up poor. My dad did have a lunch pail, though, and for many years of his life, he was an hourly worker. But we had a great upbringing. But I spent 25 to 30 years trying to go from that middle-class structure into the upper class. And David Rubenstein, the founder of Carlyle, and I were joking about this. He says, you know, I've spent 50 years, this is David talking, trying to get into the global elite. And now the word global elite is a pejorative, and I was thinking, geez, I've spent 30 years trying to do that. And so, and I'm not proud of this, but I am going to admit this to you guys, that I missed something that then Mr. Trump saw, now President Trump saw.
You weren't the only one who missed it.
I went to my
The
first...
media totally missed it.
Totally missed it because they insulated themselves. I went to my first Donald Trump rally, and I crossed the security perimeter. The Secret Service told me not to do it. I said, no, I'm going to go out in the crowd. I want to meet these people. And I started shaking hands with these people and talking to them about their lives. And then it dawned on me, I said, oh my God, these are the people I grew up with. This is a guy who didn't go to college. He doesn't have the right trade. The factory has gone away. He's on some kind of governmental dependency, does not want to be. And he needs a new policy directive. He needs new leadership to help him resolve the crisis that's in his family. And you would think that somebody like me would have saw that given the way I grew up, but I spent so much time trying to get into a conference like this, or go to the World Economic Forum, or to be part of that elite structure, if you will, that I had actually insulated myself accidentally from it. And so I'll just tell you this very quick story. It's the day after Brexit. I'm on the Harvard Law School Leadership Council, and we're having a dinner at John George's restaurant in the Trump International Hotel, right there near Central Park, second floor. The dean of the Harvard Law School has just returned from Europe. The Brexit results were in. She says, you know, I just got back from Europe. I met so many people that told me that the Brexit was not going to happen. And so, what do you guys think of it? And so I raised my hand and I said, Dean, I just have to ask the people here, there were 25 people in the room, how many of you have been to a Donald J. Trump rally or a Bernie Sanders rally? How many of you? Raise your hand if you've been to one of them. And I said, so this is what's happening. People are talking to each other. They're in the bubble. They're in this insulated loop, and you're missing what's going on in France, or going on in the UK, or what's happening in the middle of the United States. It's not just our country, Tyler.
No. You mentioned a moment ago, I have this theory that Mr. Trump had a lot of supporters, one, and a lot of supporters I would call off the grid, off the radar supporters, secret supporters. And those were the people who turned out that the media missed, that the pollsters missed. Not that they were embarrassed to endorse or be a Trump supporter, but Mrs. Clinton had no secret supporters.
And I also think that they made some tactical mistakes. I'm not here to pick on her, and I would never pick on her personally, I would just argue policy, but you may know this better than me. I don't think she made it to Wisconsin, right? And I think she got to Michigan on the last day. And I remember then candidate Mr. Trump saying to us, we were flying somewhere, he's like, wow, if she's going up to Michigan right now with President Obama, President Clinton, herself, and several media stars, she's in trouble in Michigan. And we knew she was in trouble in Michigan. I was in Michigan with Donald J. Trump Jr., and we were making speeches, we were doing local radio, we were going to town halls. And I don't know if people here are from Michigan, there's probably a few people. Macomb County is a blue-collar, dyed-in-the-wool Democratic county. And we're driving in this Ford Explorer, the two of us, and there's one lawn sign after the next, Trump, Pence, Trump, Pence, Trump, Pence, Trump, Pence. And then we get to this town hall, and I'm going to introduce Donald J. Trump Jr. I say, stupidly, geez, I want to thank my fellow Republicans for being here. There's a woman that says, I'm not a Republican. And then a lot of other people said, I'm not a Republican. And all of a sudden I said, well, how many people in this room are Democrats? And 2/3 of the room raised their hand. So I had to apologize. I said, geez, I'm sorry. I want to thank my fellow Americans. Everybody laughed. And we walked out of that town hall, and Don turned to me and said, you know, I think we had a really good chance to win Michigan. I got to call my dad and tell him about what we experienced here in Macomb County, which is a blue-collar, Democratic county.
Yeah. Let's switch back to Wall Street. As I was thinking, here's a guy, and everybody who knows you likes you, Anthony. I don't know whether you know that, or most people who know you do.
I don't know. Maybe.
A very likable guy.
Don't read your own press.
But here's a guy who's worked on and in Wall Street, who's worked in and around the media, and who is now working in politics. That is a trifecta of the three most hated,
Holy
reviled...
Trinity. It's the holy trinity of hatred.
Of hatred.
The reason why I have a full head of hair, Tyler, is to hide
What's
my
a nice guy like you from
horns.
Long Island? Where are you from on Long Island? What
yes,
town?
I grew up in Port Washington, and not to give you a geology lesson, but Long Island is the remnant of the last great ice age. And so when the glacier pulled back, all of that rubble ended up becoming Long Island, Block Island, the elbow of Cape Cod. And so Long Island had the largest granulated sand deposit in North America in the town of Port Washington, where I grew up. And so my grandfather was a coal miner. He told my dad, you cannot stay here in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania and mine coal. It's a very tough life if you know anybody that's been in coal mining. And so my dad, there was a classified ad to mine sand. And so my dad got himself to Port Washington, and he went to mine sand. And he spent 42 years at the same company, and they dug out this sand embankment. It took 95 years, and 65% of the concrete that has built the skyscrapers in New York actually came from my hometown. That sand
became part of the mix.
Yep, it was taken by barge through the Throgs Neck over to Long Island City, mixed with the concrete, and then the trucks drove over the Triborough Bridge or the 59th Street Bridge. And so, for me, it was a great upbringing because it was a very affluent community, and it had a pocket of middle-class people. And this was a time in America where hourly wages were very good. These were light blue collar. There was a little white collar mixed into the wages. And so I'll just give you this example because I priced my dad's wages in 2015. His 1975 wages, in real economic terms, Tyler, down 45%. So the same person working my father's job in 2015 would have had a way tougher time raising us, family of three, and my mom, who was a housewife, today.
That's because the wages had not risen?
They've risen,
flattened.
but I'm talking about the purchasing power of those wages are down 45%.
Inflation.
That's correct. Down 45%. So this is a systemic, fundamental problem of what's going on in the entire nation. And it's a microcosm, represented there in my dad's narrative, his story.
Absolutely the key. Incomes have not grown in 30 years, basically.
And let me tell you, people in this room, and God bless everybody in the room, have probably not had that experience. And I've certainly been a great beneficiary of the American dream and the American experience. But when I see people that I grew up with who, for whatever reason, didn't go to college, didn't get the right trade, have not been in the right area, I do know that there are like sound economic policies and there are sound things that we can do as a nation to fix that problem. We can definitely fix that problem. And frankly, we have to fix that problem. So you don't want to live in a barbed wire security compound in your McMansion with your fellow neighbors struggling. And none of us want that.
You were the first in your family to go to college, went to Tufts, and went to Harvard Law School.
Yeah.
How did you end up working on Wall Street? Why did you go to work on Wall Street? And why do you think most people who go to work on Wall Street do?
I just correct one thing. So my older brother is the first to go to college in my family.
Forgive me.
And so he went to Tufts. And so my father was like Henry Ford. You remember when he said you can have any color you want as long as it's black? My dad was like, you can go to any school you want as long as it's Tufts. You know, my father thought Tufts was spelled Toughs. I'll just give you an example. Okay? And he really did think that, right? So I said, okay, no problem. So I followed my older brother to Tufts, and but I went to Wall Street. I mean, it's just like a very simplistic answer, and it just shows my maturity at that time in my life. I read an article in Time magazine. There's a journalist who used to work for Time. I read an article in 1985 that they were paying lawyers at Cravath, Swaine & Moore $65,000 a year. That was the starting salary. So, and my dad was making like $33,000 a year. So I was like, oh my God. I said, this is more money than I could ever want or need, so I'm going to go to law school. And so I applied to law school. I got accepted to Harvard. My parents thought that was Harvard, by the way. That's another funny story in my family. They thought we were going to Harvard Law School. I said, no, we're going to Harvard, Mom. You know. And so I get up there, and I hate every minute of it, okay? And so there's probably some Italians in the room. I come home for Thanksgiving. I'm like, I hate every minute of it. I want to quit, and I'm going to go to business school, or I'm going to get myself a job. I thought my mother was going to commit suicide, like right there, okay? If anybody's watched Everybody Loves Raymond, you know, or if you've seen Moonstruck, my mother has threatened, I'm going to kill myself, I don't know, maybe 4 million times. Okay, I'm not going to leave law school. I'm going to finish law school. And so now I'm at law school. I'm like, I can't be a lawyer. It's not the right thing for me. And so I cross over the bridge to Harvard Law School, and I start reading about Wall Street and what goes on Wall Street. And I'm like, okay, I got to try to get a job on Wall Street. And that's how I ended up on Wall Street.
Why do you think most people go to work on Wall Street? Do they do it to make money? Or do they have a higher calling?
I would say there's several different reasons, but I would say that the people that do it just to make money are the most unhappy of the people that I've met in my career. I think the reason I did it is that the one fascinating thing about finance and Wall Street, it's the business of understanding other businesses. And so, you know, I started out in the research area on the asset management side. I was in investment banking first, and then I moved over to the research area. And so there you are, you're learning about insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, a whole plethora of different companies. And if you really like business, then Wall Street is a phenomenal place to go because you're going to get a liberal arts education in so many different businesses as a result of being on Wall Street.
I assume you think that on balance, Wall Street is a constructive force in society, a force for good.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, it is, but like every group of people, there are some nefarious actors. And because there are a lot of people that go to Wall Street for money, there could be sometimes that element or that expression where greed overcomes wisdom. And so I would say there's probably a group of people on Wall Street that are nefarious and bad actors that sort of spoil the whole thing for the rest of the people on Wall Street that are really just trying to do a good job for their customers or do a good job in investment banking. But what does happen in our society, though, and you can look at this over 120 years, every time the society goes through a bad cyclical process, Wall Street gets demonized. It got demonized very aggressively in the 1930s. Even Franklin Roosevelt said, listen, I love the scorn of these bankers. I relish it. It's like a badge of honor to have these people hate me. We now have Elizabeth Warren, who's in that role, where she just wants to demonize every person on Wall Street, doesn't want to separate fact from fiction. And so what typically happens is when we go through a really rough time like we did in 2008, it takes about 20 or 30 years, frankly, for Wall Street to regain its luster. It wasn't until Prescott Bush, which was George Herbert Walker Bush's father, George W. Bush's grandfather, got elected in 1952 in Connecticut, who was a 30-year banker at Brown Brothers Harriman. When he got elected during the Eisenhower coattails, Wall Street started to get its reputation back. And then we rode that pretty successfully, I would say, until the 2008 crisis.
So you don't see what went on in 2005, 6, 7, leading up to 2008 as systemic, as some would say?
No, I would say that there were parts of it that are systemic. I mean, not to give an overly mundane analysis of this, but what basically happened is if you look at leverage ratios on banks over 125 years, the right leverage ratios are about 20 to 1. When leverage ratios on banks go above that, the risks in those banks in terms of their health, they become much more suspect. And so what ended up happening, and I actually have this, if somebody's interested, you can ask Randy for it. I have the actual transcript of the SEC meeting where the American Banking Association went down to the SEC in 2005-06 and lobbied them to move leverage ratios from 20 to 34 to 1. So that's now systemic. Why did they do that? They said, listen, we're much smarter than our grandparents. We have got all these propeller heads that are brilliant in risk management, and we need to compete with these foreign banks and blah, blah, blah. So let's move our leverage ratios 34 to 1. And so what happens is you have a 3% move, you knock out your equity. And if you don't get that risk metric thing right, Tyler, you're going to have a systemic banking crisis. And so we had it right. And our grandparents, through Glass-Steagall, or our great-grandparents, had it right. But what happens is that greed will overcome wisdom.
And the leverage goes up.
Yeah, and so now we're on the other side of it. Now we're on the other side. Now you have a situation with Dodd-Frank, where you're trying to make the world too safe. And so what's happening now is we've got the leverage ratios clamped down. If you're a small business person in this room and you want a loan, you've got to give a pint of your blood, your firstborn child, and all your assets up to get the loan. And our community banks are actually dying. And our small businesses at the front end of those community banks are not getting the necessary capital they need to grow. And you can see it in the economic data. You can see it in the jobs market. You can see it across the spectrum. Now you say, well, geez, there's 4.8% unemployment. But look at the labor participation rate. It's at a 45-year low. Look at the quality and the construction of that labor market. These jobs are not super healthy from a wage point of view. Just look at the wage numbers. And so what we have to do is we have to get the Dodd-Frank legislation, that reform right. The pendulum has swung too far. Everybody in this room knows that the world's unfair and it's also unsafe. And if you're relying on the government to make it fairer and safer, incrementally they can perhaps do a little bit of that. But if you try to make the world too safe, what ends up happening is you slow down growth, you slow down risk-taking, and we need to get to the right equipoise where you can have some banks fail, where the equity holders of the banks actually lose their money if they make bad loans, but you keep the entire system safe so that there's no systemic crisis. And so we did have a systemic crisis, but we don't need to have one. We just need people that are very thoughtful and have a very good historical understanding of how to put these policies together, and we have a lot of data that supports that.
Has Dodd-Frank, I don't mean to get into the weeds too much here because I want to get to some other points, but has Dodd-Frank reduced the systemic risk measurably? Yes.
Immeasurably, but to the point where
it's choked off some other...
You've got medication that the economy needs. And Dodd-Frank is one of those safety caps, and you cannot get the medication out of the... You're twisting and turning, and you can't get... And it's just too tight of a safety cap on what the economy is. Remember, whatever you think of Wall Street is the arterial structure of the modern capital system, okay? It is the blood system for the modern economy. If you've got a great idea in fracking, you go to Wall Street, you get the capital for it, Tyler. If you've got a new social media site that you think is going to revolutionize the world, you need capital to flow to you through the arterial structure of Wall Street to put you into business. And so one of the most phenomenal things about our country, if you think of our legal system and you think of the flow of capital in our country, it is the life force and lifeblood of the reason why we only have 6% of the world's population, but we have 23.6% of the world's GDP. The structure is in place for America to grow and America to thrive, but we've left a lot of people behind.
So
and so we have to figure
why
that
are
out.
so many Americans suspicious of Wall Street or actively contemptuous of it?
Yeah.
Why do they not like bankers?
Well, the media, you know, I'm not trying to blame
No,
the
no,
media
no,
because
no, no.
I'm not a TV host. I just play one on television. But I would say this to you, that the media is trying to get eyeballs. And so what happens on Wall Street is they focus on three things. They focus on the person that made $1 billion. They focus on the person that lost $1 billion. And then the big kahuna is the person that stole $1 billion. So it's made $1 billion, lost $1 billion, stole $1 billion. Made $1 billion, lost $1 billion, stole $1 billion. And the stole $1 billion is the #1 story. If somebody stole $1 billion today, your network, Fox Business, Bloomberg, that would be the narrative for 2 to 25 days. And so then people say, geez, these are very bad actors. These are all very, very bad people. But if there's 300 or 400,000 people that are in the financial services industry, I don't know the exact number today because I didn't look it up, I would tell you that, you know, the people are very hardworking. You know, there's a very hardworking group of people. I can tell you the people that I've hired at Skybridge, we're dedicated to serving the customer. And I tell my staff, you will never do anything to dishonor my parents. Okay, my dad gave me my last name clean. You're never going to do anything to dishonor my parents or their hard work to put me in the position I'm in.
Let's talk about one of those billionaires.
I think a lot of people feel that way about Wall Street.
Let's talk about briefly about one of those billionaires who's made many more than just $1 billion, and that's Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
In his shareholder letter over the weekend, he talked about the value or lack of value that is provided by active money management. He is a believer that indexing or passive management is going to beat the pants off of most active managers most of the time. I guess that of the people in this audience, a lot of you have money managers who are actively managing money. He was particularly harsh on hedge funds with the classic 2 and 20 price schedule. What do you think of that, and how, after several years where hedge funds haven't done as well as benchmark indexes, how do you, as a Wall Street practitioner in the hedge fund business, or until recently, we'll get to that, how do you square that? How do you justify?
Well, the first thing I would say is that Mr. Buffett is a representation of active management himself.
Yes, he is.
And so he's obviously done very, very well as an active manager, and so he's evidence that active management does work. Now, if Mr. Buffett is saying that he's the only person that can practice active management and everyone else is not worthy of it, I sort of disagree with that. I think that that's probably too self-centric in terms of the analysis. If he's making a broader comment that the indexes and the ETFs seem to do better than the active management, clinically that is absolutely true. But then you have to examine the society and where we are at this point in the society. And so what we've had for the last 8 or 9 years is a very aggressive macroeconomic policy from the US government known as low interest rates or zero interest rate policy. And even for a period of time, we had quantitative easing, which was effectively negative interest rates. And so in a period like that, where you have zero to low interest rates, that rising tide, that reflation trade should work very, very well. And if you're a hedge fund manager and you're definitionally long some things and short others, if everything is going up, well, you're going to then underperform. And so that is a great rear view window analysis of what's happened. But what I worry about for clients is that we could enter a period of greater volatility. We could enter a period of interest rate normalization where all of a sudden, lo and behold, like in the period 2001 to 2004, hedge funds do very well, or the period 1992 to 1997, hedge funds do very well. And so what I say to clients is, you certainly should have your share of ETFs and indexes and passive, but there should be, in your pizza, there should be a 5 to 15 cent slice of pizza into things that I think are more driven by alternatives that could dampen your volatility and help you reach your actuarial goals. So I don't disagree with him, but I just think what we have to be very careful of, and we saw some great scientific presentations here, is we have to really give it a longer historical analysis. And so what also happens is that, listen, he's been very, very successful. One of the things I'm always worried about with people that are very, very successful, they start thinking that they're experts on everything. And so we have to be very, very careful of that, because our own self-success can give us certain biases.
Right.
And we have to step back from that, and we have to be suspicious of our own analysis, if you will.
Let's talk a little bit about the administration, politics, and your participation in the political world.
Yeah.
Whatever anyone in this room thinks, or whatever I think of Donald Trump and his policies, one of the things that I have been heartened by is the idea that in his cabinet, he has attracted people who have actually done a lot in their life. They're builders, they're business builders, business operators, many of them. Not all of them, but many of them. And you were one of the people that I was happy to see as a business builder, and not just a person who had spent their life in politics, was potentially going to take a job in the administration.
Yeah.
Let's get to where things stand now with Anthony Scaramucci and the Trump administration. You were considered for, many people thought you had a very high-level liaison position in the administration that is now on pause. Why? What happened? What's next?
Well, I mean, it's on pause for a number of different reasons, but I think the main reason is, and it's just the way things work, I sold the business on January 17th, and because I have 41,000 clients, I have to get investor consent letters out to those clients, and they have to approve the transaction, which the good news is the board has already approved it, and the underlying brokerage firms that sell our product, like Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch, and there's 17 of those, have also approved it. So the likelihood of the transaction going through is very highly likely. But where I am right now is because I still technically own the asset. There's some concern at the government level that I wouldn't be able to sign a broad enough recusal, which would include things related to policy at the SEC or things related to things going on at Treasury. And so what Steve Bannon and Ryan Priebus said to me is, listen, we're going to put this on hold. You're going to get a job in the White House, but we have to wait until your deal closes. You may end up, in fact, in the job that we offered you, which is the public liaison job, or you'll end up in a job similar to it. And, I take them at their word on that. I also have I would say a close relationship with the president. And he's made it very clear to me that he doesn't want me to withdraw. He would like me to be a part of the administration. But this is one of the tough things about the government, and you probably saw this yesterday. The Secretary of Navy designee pulled out. The Secretary of Army designee pulled out, because what you find is if, to your point about high-achieving people in the private sector, they have a lot of different assets. They have a collection of different things that they own, and what the government wants you to do is sell everything, get yourself into cash. You can own actually ETFs or the S&P 500 as long as it's in a blind trust. And so, Tyler, for people like myself who've been an entrepreneur for the last 30 years, it's a hard process. And so there's a gating step to it, if you will.
I am hearing you say that you are hopeful that the deal will close, number one, and hopeful and expect that over the next few weeks, months, that you will have a position in the administration. Now, let me ask you just one follow-up there, and I want to get to a couple of other things. I'm going to go over time because I'm enjoying this, okay? I'm going to go. Is that all right with you all? All right. There have been reports in the press that one of the holdups was that the party that you sold Skybridge to is affiliated closely with the Chinese government, which is
that was a really nasty story. I mean, they were showing like slums in Beijing. I mean, that was like, so this is like,
that an impediment in this process at all?
I don't think so. But I think what happens in Washington is, I'm at the World Economic Forum. The head of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Russia, he's in a restaurant. And I've known him. I've gone to the World Economic Forum in Davos for 10 years. He gets up, he comes over and says hello to me. We have a 3 to 5 minute conversation. It's very social. A journalist takes a picture of us. And then the next day, senior Trump advisor, consorting with the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Russia, And then my good friend Elizabeth Warren is sending a letter to my real friend Stephen Mnuchin saying that we need to now investigate Anthony Scaramucci because he's talking to the Russian sovereign wealth fund. And so I was going to put out on Twitter that Elizabeth Warren and I were going to have a cocktail party at the Russian embassy, but I was advised not to do that. But because these guys can't take a joke. And so like what happens is, you know, if you're an effective media surrogate or you have an effective voice that you can help one of the two sides, let's say I was a Democrat, the Republicans will figure out a way to pile on and do the best they can to discredit me. And the same is true on the other side. And unfortunately, I think the American people are actually very fed up with this stuff now. And so those opposition research stories about H&A, which were completely false. Number one, they're not affiliated with the Communist Chinese government. It's a privately owned enterprise. Number two, they are I sold to the American subsidiary. It's run by American citizens. And if you really look at H&A, they are a net buyer of U.S. goods and services. They don't even export anything in the United States. They bought more Boeing aircraft because H&A stands for Hunai National Airlines. They bought more Boeing aircraft last year than any company in the world. And so, but it's a great narrative. I'm somehow now linked to the Chinese.
Right.
In 1 week, Tyler, I got linked to the Venezuelans, the Chinese, and the Russians. And I'm still standing. And so I figured the North Koreans and the Iranians are next.
They're next.
I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
My point being is that if you don't have a strong stomach and a strong backbone and really love the country, you don't go to try to serve because at the end of the day,
well, that's the impediment that keeps so many people out.
This is the nature of the game. And this is something that I do think the American people are actually fed up about.
Yep.
And I think we have to go over the top of this nonsense and explain it directly to the American people.
I don't want to fall too far behind on time, but I want to conclude by just asking you to tell the people in this audience a couple of things that they don't know but should about Steve Bannon and about President Trump. What should this audience know about Mr. Bannon
I was at the cocktail reception.
and Mr. Trump?
Somebody asked me last night at the cocktail reception, is Steve Bannon an anti-Semite? So let's start with that, okay? Steve Bannon is not an anti-Semite. And I can give you 200 reasons why, but let's just start with his relationship with Jared Kushner. And let's start with the fact that the president himself has 3 Orthodox grandchildren that are being raised Orthodox and keep the Sabbath. So there's no way that Steve Bannon is an anti-Semite. Now, you may not like some of Steve Bannon's policies, and you certainly don't like the way Steve Bannon is probably being portrayed in the media, but I'll say 2 things about Steve Bannon. Number one, he's read every book at the Barnes & Noble twice. He could be one of the smartest people that I know. Number 2, the situation that the country is in right now, where we have a group of people that are not benefiting from the system the way we would like them to. Okay, I would describe my family as being a group of people that were part of the aspirational working class. That maybe my dad wasn't going to get rich, but you know what, his kids, he was going to put them in college and someday they were going to get rich. That aspirational middle class is now turning into the working poor, and the working class, we dropped 8 million people below the poverty line in the last 10 years. And nobody understands that better than Steve Bannon. And so I'm optimistic about his strategy and the implementation of policy to help that problem. And trust me, all of us need to help that problem. As it relates to the president, I'll say 2 things about him. Number one, loves the country. He's an absolute patriot. Did not need to do this with his life. He had a great lifestyle. But the thing about him is that he's an old school sort of a guy. And so he doesn't like taking guff from anybody, whether it's the media
We've noticed
or
that.
anybody.
Yeah.
Okay?
We've noticed that.
So he doesn't like taking it, okay? And so, so he'll give it as hard as he's getting it. And secondarily, okay, there is neuroplasticity to him. He is the most adaptive person that I have ever met. Okay, he's incredibly smart, and this is a 70-year-old that has used Twitter and other forms of social media better than all of your grandchildren or any of the millennials. And so what I predict will happen over the next 60 to 90 days is that he's going to make a major adaptation as he adjusts to Washington and he adjusts to this game that they play down in Washington, which is Game of Thrones, Hunger Games, and the House of Cards get together and they write a screenplay called Washington, D.C. And he's starting to make that adjustment now. And as he makes that adjustment, because he wants to be an incredibly successful president, he'll go in a direction that he needs to become a very
Will we start to see it tomorrow night when he speaks to Congress?
Oh, I think he'll give a great speech tomorrow night. I mean, let me tell you something. He is a very, you may not like all of his syntax, you may not like the structure of some of his sentences, and he probably doesn't talk with the flowery language of a John Kennedy or Barack Obama, but I'll tell you what, he is an incredibly effective, incredibly forceful communicator.
Someone said to me during the campaign, I'll leave it here, he talks the way Americans talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was part of the secret of his connection to so much of the country. Anthony Scaramucci.
Yeah, my pleasure. I really
thank you very much. That was really great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was really good. Good. We'll talk soon.